I'd like to introduce the panel of speakers this morning. I'm Jyotish, for those of you who don't know me, and this is Hriman on your left. Hriman and Padma, his wife, are the leaders of the community in Seattle. And Asha, along with David, lead the community in Palo Alto. This is Ananta. Until recently, he and his wife led the community in Sacramento, but now they are in charge. They've recently moved back to the village here, and they're in charge of working with the youth ashram, youth program here, which is absolutely wonderful. And this is Devi, my wife on the end, and we live here at the village. So this morning we're going to talk about the mission of communities that the masters had, and a little bit about the meaning behind communities. It's a very, very interesting and important topic. I want to talk first, though, to fill you in, because many of you don't know the history, why we consider today the 40th anniversary. Devi mentioned it briefly, but we had the property that we now call the meditation retreat for a couple of years before we had this property. And we were developing some buildings, and in fact, there was quite a residential population there in the spring of 1969. But it soon became apparent that that was not the place to start a community. And so Swamiji looked around for land and found this land. I won't go into the whole story because it's long, fun, and a little bit complicated. You can read about it in one of the books that we have. But he found this land, and escrow closed, and we took possession on July 4th, 1969. That gives us a firm starting date for the communities movement in America. So this is the 40th birthday party that we're having now. And as Devi intimated, we will now have an annual event talking about communities and the importance of them, and celebrating together. I want to talk a little bit about the mission that brought the masters here, and the mission that resulted in the creation of communities. It isn't by happenstance. Great masters like this do not kind of casually come into the world. All great masters come in with a mission, but some of those missions are more important in a worldly sense, not in a divine sense, but in a worldly sense, they can be more important. And the mission of these masters in particular for the world is very, very central. I'll explain a little bit. Many great saints come into this world, and all of them, their primary mission is to turn the hearts and minds of people toward God. That's why they incarnate, and that's why they come and gather disciples around them, or that they have a message for the world. But this particular line of masters has incarnated again and again and again at particular changing points in the direction of the world and its history and humanity. For instance, Master said that he was Arjuna and Babaji was Krishna at the time of Kurukshetra. Now, Kurukshetra, in the cycle of the yugas, which I again won't go into, but in the cycle of the yugas, Kurukshetra and that great battle was about the same time in the descending cycle of the cycles as we are in the ascending cycle of the yugas. So they came at the end of Dwapara descending, the beginning of Kali Yuga descending. And now they've come again at the end of Kali Yuga ascending and Dwapara Yuga ascending. So at those two pivotal points. And there's a third incarnation that Master had That's very, very important also. And he said that he also came as William the Conqueror. And Swamiji was at that time his youngest son, Henry. Henry was the one who carried on the mission that Yogananda, his guru, or William in that life, incarnated for. Now, why would they come at these pivotal times? Because at these pivotal times, humanity needs a course correction. Well, let's face it, we always need a course correction. But at these pivotal times, we need a major course correction, one that will get us on the right direction for the succeeding yuga, in this case, for the next couple of thousand years. And so they came at this time in order to give us that primary teaching, not just us, the ones who sit here, but mankind as a whole, the primary teachings that we need to align ourselves to. And why do we need to align ourselves to? Just because they're authority figures or they're sent by God? We were laughing with Swamiji yesterday about Michelangelo's view of mankind on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, where he's shaking his finger and all the damned, and he really paints the damned well. All the damned are being thrust into hell. And that's a very old-fashioned, old Kali Yuga idea of mankind. But why do the masters come? They don't come to shake their finger and to admonish us. They come only for our benefit. They are a manifestation of love and caring and compassion. And they come in order to express to us in a loving way what we can do to be happy. Master said that everyone in the world is motivated by the same single primary motivation, the desire to be happy and the desire not to be in pain. And so they come and let us know how we can be happy and how we can avoid pain. In this case, as I was saying, there are certain eras, certain time periods in history, and in each of those time periods, a particular strategy is better in order to be happy. And in this age, this is the age of energy. And so, as I say, the old Kali Yuga concept of religion, where you have a God that's condemning you, why would they have that in Kali Yuga? Because at that time, mankind's consciousness is at the very lowest, and they need rules and someone saying, if you don't follow these rules, you're going to get punished. Otherwise, they don't follow the rules at all. At the time Master incarnated as William the Conqueror, he set in motion at that time a centralization of consciousness. The world was so split. The invasion or the conquering of England year was 1066, so roughly 1,000 years ago. The consciousness of the nations of the world, they weren't even nations. The consciousness of the world was very fractured. And at that time, it was just a whole grouping of warring barons and lords and fighting constantly. In fact, one of the reasons the Crusades started very shortly after the invasion, they started about 20 years after William conquered England. The reason that Pope Urban started those was in part to unite the Christian world into a single goal. Basically, if you're going to fight, why fight each other? Let's unite together and fight a common enemy. Unfortunately, it's a very stupid way of thinking. Nonetheless, it had its purpose in those times, and that's what I'm trying to make the point, is that the masters have to act according to the times that they're in. If we are unfortunate enough to have to incarnate in Treta Yuga, and look back at these times, we will think they're unbelievably crude. Just as looking back at 1,000 years ago, we think, well, how crude. They couldn't even get along with each other. They were fractured. They were fighting all the time. Sounds like the movies to me. So our consciousness needs direction, and they come at that time. Master came as William the Conqueror. Swami came as his son Henry, in order to plant the seeds that would lead to a stepping stone in our age. So a unified government, the beginnings of English as a language, which will become the world language, is already becoming the world language. So they were planting the seeds that allows for a greater unity. Okay, so in this lifetime, Master came, and this line of masters came again, and with a very particular mission. And that mission, in very central terminology, means community. But I'll come to that. They also had some other things that they were doing. As I said, all saints come in order to turn men's hearts and minds toward God. And so Master and this line of gurus did, of course, do that. But they also came saying that if you want to turn your mind and your heart toward God, there are ways that are more effective and ways that are less effective. And in this age, the way that's effective is self-realization. Always, during all ages, the ultimate goal is self-realization. It is the dissolving of the ego, the sense of separateness, the sense of being separate from God. That is always, as Master called it, the eternal quest. And the eternal quest doesn't matter ages, but the strategy by which we try to achieve that changes in the ages. So they say, first of all, the primary purpose of your incarnation is to turn your heart and your mind toward God and to dissolve the ego. But, they say, in the past, perhaps rules, outward ceremonies, prayers were the most effective way to do that. But that's not true in this age. In this age, which is an age of energy, we must work with the energies of the body. And so they gave us the techniques that work with energy. Our primary techniques work with prana. Pranayama literally means the control of prana or energy or life force. And so our techniques are those that allow us to control, to point, and to uplift the energies that we have. So they gave us Kriya Yoga, the Om technique, Hong Sa, and Master created the energization techniques, all to point our energy. But more than that, they gave us inner communion as the goal. So you can, for instance, just pray prayers out loud and pray and pray. I was very amused. I don't know whether it was last year or the year before, but there's a beautiful chant, which is desire, my great enemy. It's giving me lots of trouble, and then goes on to say essentially pranayama is the way to conquer that great enemy, desire. Well, we had a little skit, and Devaki was playing this essentially worldly woman in it, and she was singing that chant, but in such a way, desire, my great enemy is giving, like a little, she was mouthing the words, but it was obviously no real meaning to it, and she did that so well. So we can pray out loud, we can say the words, but without the meaning, we don't get the essence of it. When, for instance, there's long been a teaching that if you want to, as Krishna says in the Gita, he who is able to keep his mind fixed on me speedily comes to me. And so if we're trying to keep our mind fixed on him, how do we do that? One way is to pray, to sing songs to Krishna, to think of Krishna. But there's another way, and deeper and more appropriate to our age. Krishna represents the spiritual eye. And the real worship of Krishna at the spiritual eye is the offering of the life force into that point, which is the essence of Kriya Yoga, the essence of our path. Master said, if you want to make very, very rapid progress, the most rapid progress is to keep your mind constantly fixed at the spiritual eye. Another way of saying, Krishna saying, keep your mind constantly fixed on me. Keep your energy, keep your life force constantly flowing toward the Christ consciousness or Krishna consciousness. So see, in this age, the old forms are now turned and moved into the essence, more the essence and the energy of those forms. So that's one thing. They came to teach us the most efficient way to worship them, actually to follow them. We had some pilgrims from India visit us, and we had a satsang last week or the week before. One of them said a very interesting thing. I found it very enlightening. She said, in India, it's very, very common to worship the Guru. Most Indians' families have a little puja room or something, and they worship the Guru. She said, but here at Ananda, you don't just worship the Guru, you follow the Guru. And that little turn makes all the difference, doesn't it? And so we're trying to follow the teachings of the great masters. So they've given us the spiritual teachings, but they've given us a second thing that is also just as important, which is the bridge to the reason that we have Ananda. They have said that in this age, it is not the best strategy to simply turn your back on the world and isolate yourself. There are a few souls maybe that's right for, but for the mass of mankind, that's not right. On the other hand, it's also not right to worship God in your puja room or a little bit on Sunday morning and forget about it the rest of the time and go about trying to greedily overcome your enemies by business enemies by whatever means spring to mind. All of life, they say, should be integrated in this age. Your families, home, job, church, all integrated into your spiritual search. And that's very important because it wasn't necessarily true 1,000 years ago. Remember when Lahiri Mahashaya came to Babaji? Babaji gave him an experience. He was in ecstasy and samadhi for 7 days or 9 days, I've forgotten which. And after that, he came out of that great experience. He said, Babaji, please let me remain with you here in the Himalayas. And Babaji said, there was a reason that you were not called here until you were a grown man and you had modest family and worldly responsibilities. Go back to your family, go back to your job. He went back. He was an accountant for the British. I mean, how more mundane in a certain sense can you get than that? That's one of the avatars. So that is very, very much symbolic of the fact that in this age, we must integrate the daily activities of our life, everything, with our spiritual search. There is no longer reason to separate those two. And so our businesses, our work, our family life, our education, our entertainment, everything should be an aid to our desire, our eternal quest, which is the dissolving of the ego. Everything should lead toward the dissolving of the ego. And so the integration of the philosophy that they brought, the spiritual path that they brought, along with daily life, those are the first two steps. But then, how do we get that out into the world? Out of 1,000, one follows me, it says in the Gita. Well, that's not very many, 1 in 1,000. If you're 1 in 1,000 kind of bumping around with 999 people who don't share your ideals, don't share even the thought that your ideals might be a proper ideal, even if they don't share them themselves, then it's very hard to get the momentum. So Master said, gather together in spiritual communities, in world brotherhood colonies, as he gave the term, of like-minded people so that we can reinforce each other in the spiritual search. Everybody who lives here or lives as a resident in one of our many communities knows the value of living with other devotees, of having that constant reinforcement and constant inspiration. There isn't a person in this community who doesn't inspire me in some way. It's almost as if everyone specializes on the behalf of all the rest of us in some little area and offers that as an inspiration. And that grouping together, constantly mixing and uplifting, makes the power so much stronger. We were recounting to Swamiji yesterday or the day before an incident when Devi and I started the ashram in San Francisco. There was a young man who came to the ashram at that point, and he said, I've always felt that I had so much to give to the world, but nobody wanted it until I came here. And here in these communities, we want what each other has. We want the highest for each other. It's almost like a heaven on earth, where there's almost no cross current. The Master called them the thwarting cross currents of ego. We can't say that the people here live without ego. That would be untrue. But the veils of ego are thin and flapping in the breeze of Master's will. And so with that, there's a very, very much of an uplifted consciousness. Now that's important not only for those of us who live here and who benefit by it, but if these masters, as I've said, came into the world to set a new direction for mankind, mankind as a whole is not ready to pick up on it just in terms of philosophy. They need examples, and they need to see, in this scientific age, they need to see an experiment that says this works. We are the living laboratory of Master's teachings so that we can demonstrate to the world that it works, and so that people everywhere have the confidence to make the leap into a lifestyle such as this. And Master said that this is the lifestyle for Dwapara Yuga. He said that these communities will spread like wildfire. Well, there are sparks here and there, and we're pushing on those bellows as hard as we can to get the conflagration going. But it is destined. It's God's will. And we are enormously blessed to have the opportunity to live in such a community at such an early stage of this great work, this great mission of the Masters.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Hriman from Seattle, and I want to talk a little bit about what Jyotish touched on, which is the unification in our life of our job, our home, and our church. We recently, up in Seattle, had our first... Back up a little bit because you're talking. Okay. Our first ever open house. And we waited quite a few years. I think we've been there, well, since 92, whatever that is, many years. And we finally had the courage to do an open house. And we're quite grateful that the response was a very welcome and warm one, both from intentional communities and the local area as well. But as Jyotish said, the spreading of like wildfire has not exactly happened yet. Now, a couple of comments, because in my experience in talking to other communities, I realize that our vocabulary, it'll be helpful for us to understand what we're really talking about in a broad sense, as well as in relating as having an impact on this community's movement. For you see, spiritual communities, or religious communities as they're usually called, though not by us, are generally discounted in the community's movement as being somewhat irrelevant because of their focus on spirituality and less so on the, you might say, the humanistic aspects of the community's lifestyle. But you know, when you read Yogananda, when you read Master's description of communities in his autobiography and other writings, he talks about high ideals and simplicity of life. He didn't overtly or specifically, although his whole life was dedicated to self-realization, but in his comments on communities, he painted for us a very broad picture. Similarly, I know also, I was talking at a class I did and enthusiastically about our upcoming open house, and someone came up to me afterwards and said, well, you know, I live in a house, and that's a kind of community too. And I said, well, of course it's a kind of community, but here we are today celebrating 40 years of an intentional spiritual community. And of course, everything that we talk about in community, how we live and job, work, and so forth, home and church, of course it has application without. I was thinking that in the beginning of Ananda village in 1969, I doubt even Google could tell us how many communities were established that same year, but I can pretty well guess there aren't very many left to tell the tale. And so if we perhaps err in the direction of a Jewish joke I've heard Devi tell occasionally, and I've read, that goes something along like this, if I don't butcher it too badly. A Jewish person was once wanting to tell a Gentile friend the history of their feasts and so forth. And he said, well, it goes like this, you see. They tried to destroy us. They didn't. Let's eat. And so I hope you'll forgive us for the fact that merely surviving is itself a victory. And it is. We've certainly had our challenges. But survive for what? And that's our topic today. Because it's not, as it might have had a hint of at least, if not more, in the early days of the founding of this World Brotherhood Village, it is not really a turning our back on the world. As Jyotish talked about, this is an age for bringing spirit to work, spirit into form, into the world. And though there was a touch of that back to the land movement, I found in my conversations with other communitarians that we've matured. There's an understanding that this community's lifestyle acts as a demonstration, a model of how to live in this new age, where your next door neighbor can be from a different culture, a different religion, speak a different language, and so on. And so part of our understanding needs to be that even if amongst us here today, this group, that not everyone can, in fact, live in a World Brotherhood colony, community, nonetheless, the example bears great fruit for how we live in daily life. Secondly, I think when I reflected about at our open house who we were and what our role was in the community's movement, and when our manager, Larry Ryder, did some research in the Northwest and submitted a list of about 40 intentional communities, including co-housing groups, I realized going down the list, by golly, we're the largest one of them all and among the most senior in time, and it hasn't been that many years to boot. And so I realized that we should be a part of this movement. We can be an example to the movement. And when Master talked about our ideals, for us our ideals are summarized in the term self-realization through the practice of Kriya Yoga and as disciples of a great guru. But yet in my conversations with other communitarians, they too, for the most part, are motivated by ideals of one sort or another. And so when he talks about this spreading like wildfire, I at least, and I think probably many of us here too, realize that the form that this will take is not necessarily lots of Ananda communities all over the world, although that'd be perfectly fine with most of us. It's the fact that people will realize the value of coming together to share their ideals and to express those in daily life. I think of the symbol of the bomb. I grew up in the 50s in rather an idealistic, or whatever that term is. I practically have to apologize for having an idyllic childhood by the ocean and this, that, and the other. And really, it was wonderful. But, there we were hiding under our desks because the bomb was going to go off any minute. And this, that, and the other. There was plenty of anxiety, and our parents, for the most part, were busy trying to forget the Depression, forget the war years and Korean War and so on and so forth. But in the symbol of that bomb, which split the atom, in some ways it fragmented our psyche, because it fooled us into imagining we had power over matter, and that was enough. Jyotish mentioned about the broader trends in our culture and on our planet, and I think we have to be kind to ourselves in saying that we can't really see what those trends are, or can't really judge the culture in which we live from the fact that we live in it. But on the other hand, I, for one, can't help but imagine hundreds of years from now, history will look back on the 20th century especially, and on how far into the 21st, I can't say and prefer not to imagine, that this was a time of great fragmentation of our psyche. And there are alternative lifestyles and people working in science and ecology and sustainability on all forms that are seeking in their own way to rebuild that psyche. And so what I wanted to talk about a little bit, just touch on, was this idea of sustainability. A good friend of mine in Seattle, his name is Christopher Mayer, travels all over the world. He works on concepts and planning of eco-villages in Thailand and Australia and Europe and America. And he's been sharing with me some of his research and his different conferences he goes to, and it's really quite impressive. There are many people doing wonderful things. But I said to him, sustainability, okay, I can understand that in ecological terms, at least to some extent, permaculture and so on. But what about sustainability of our spirit? What about sustainability of our heart? What about sustainability of creativity and joy? After all, a community that gets formed in order to have a wonderful farm, if they can't get along, how wonderful will that farm be and for how long? Not very, and not very likely. And so you might say in the communities movement, we're at that end of the spectrum, which, as Jyotish talks about, represents the new dispensation of spiritual consciousness into this age. And yet, this concept will spread increasingly throughout the world. When I talk to high-minded people of whatever persuasion they may be, looking at the circumstances we face around us, people say, without exception, well, yes, these are challenging times for us, but it's a time for us to reorient our priorities. What's sustainability if we go into debt beyond our means? What's sustainability if we can never have a deep and committed relationship or friendship? What's sustainability if we eat at McDonald's all our life and so on? Well, we know what that is. Sustainability, therefore, is something that's within us. And when we have the lifestyle in these communities, which has given so many of us who have been privileged to live this lifestyle of having in one place our job, our church, and our home and families and friends, over the years it's just grown within me the sensibility. What a sensible way to live. We're not turning our backs on the world. People from these communities travel all over the world. We have friends and other communities. Swamiji, God bless him, has, even in our times of trial, as it were, when it would be so easy when you're down and out and hurt and struggling to turn your back on the world and to focus on getting your home built, for example, as was needed after the fire in 1976. At every crucial turn, he offered to us by his example service. And it's not a huge change. It's not a giant shift in any outward term to go from work to service. But if you work in corporate America, and God bless all those good souls who are working in corporate America with high ideals, God bless you all. But when you're working in those venues, you are largely working alone with very little support. For this model of cooperation with our world for a sustainable lifestyle on all levels to really be meaningful and impactful and to be an example, we need tangible examples. And so he has shown us, and I was thinking recently, and many of us are describing Swami's health come back recently as nothing less than a miracle. And we've been so blessed to have his wisdom, his attunement with the great master, the Paramahansa Yogananda, to help give birth to these communities. But if we're honest and we looking forward into the future, and we have gathered here today a wide range of ages, and many of you will have to carry these ideals on, we're not always going to have. It doesn't make sense, or it isn't safe to rely upon always having such a leader of wisdom always before us and guiding us. Because the fact is, the truth is, in Dwapara Yuga, and the ideal of self-realization, is that we must needs go inside to find those inner resources, and then only can we recognize them without ourselves. And so we must find those inner resources. He's taught us supportive leadership, which means not to emphasize leadership for its own sake, but how it can support one another, that people are more important than things. I happen to be the person who was I suppose, the central figure in a story he tells in the book, the place called Ananda. I was on the housing committee for some years, and in most communities, it's generally true that housing, the supply of housing is in short supply, however you put that. And in those days, in the early days, when things were, well, to put a happy face on it, considered temporary dwellings, when it came time to sell one or something to another person, you simply got back what you cost in materials. Later on, when we had to get permits and do things a little more up to snuff or code, a lot more labor was involved, and so labor became an element. Well, in that transition between the temporary dwellings and the more permanent ones, issues arose on how to fairly value things, because in most intentional communities, not driven by market and making money and so forth, we want people who want to live this way to be able to afford it. And so there are natural restraints on how much you can ask for your home. And so at that particular time, and not having done this before, some of us were not too pleased about a particular instance in which a member who was moving elsewhere wanted for his home. Well, I'll never forget, and he will never let me forget, having published the story, that there was a higher principle than precedent, and so on, and the higher principle was compassion for one who was leaving the community. And that, of course, in the end, the price that he wanted was not a particularly big deal, even though it may have seemed so for the circumstances that surrounded it at the time. And so learning these lessons on how to get along, learning how to open your home, as all of our communities do, whether we have an open house or visitors to our community, to open your home to guests. He's taught us how to be gracious and how to serve people, and the guest is God. I find increasingly with people coming to our communities, our lifestyle is so fragmented. People rarely sit down in their homes and have a dinner together, rarely use forks and knives, and only those boxes that come from the store, and eat directly out of them. And this way of how to live and how to integrate our private meditations with our public worship, how each feeds the other, and so on. I've often told the story when I lived here for many years that I could always tell when my attunement was dwindling when I'd wake up on a Sunday morning and say, I've been with these people all week. Do I need to go to Sunday service? After a while, even I caught on and realized, yes, because when I did, of course, I came away inspired. But these lessons are much more difficult. Going to church only on Sunday is not enough to give you the experience and not enough to give anybody else an example. And that's what these communities serve for, is to give an example. How many people, some of you here today, hundreds who have come over 40 years, attest for the fact that even the existence of such a community is indeed an inspiration and a model to many people. And I know I speak for all of us here gathered today and many hundreds of others around the world who are deeply grateful for having had the good karma, the opportunity to live in such a community. But by those who come, whether they live here or not, and help be part of it, the virtual community, it's a great blessing and a great work. Thank you.
The first three speakers, counting me as the third, are dealing with three fundamental phrases that are integral to an understanding of World Brotherhood colonies. The first is that, World Brotherhood. We live in a country that until recently has been relatively unified in terms of race and culture. The area that I live in now, which is the Silicon Valley area, is actually divided up now in thirds, I'm told. 1/3 of the people are what you would think of as Californians, native Californians. 1/3 are from Spanish-speaking countries. 1/3 are from Asian countries or island countries. So literally, you walk around where we are now. Our local market has signs in English and Russian. All of the Sears and Target kind of stores have all their signs now doubling in Spanish. We all know if you go to Fry's, you have to speak Chinese or Hindi to really be waited on well. So at least in pockets of the United States, the concept of World Brotherhood is beginning to happen. Of course, we see it especially in our European community, where you go and you see countries that historically have been enemies, where the people are coming together, which is a far more meaningful reality than we can understand here. There's still bullet holes in the buildings around Italy. And then you have the Germans and the Americans and all the people who fought one another. And even when there were the wars in the Balkans, all of the different countries would come to Ananda and just meditate together. And so we have World Brotherhood. The second is the lifestyle, which Hriman was talking about, home, job, and church in one place, which is really quite a remarkable integration. And the third principle that I've been asked to speak about is plain living and high thinking. And it's the idea of how renunciation and simple living fits into this whole picture. I've been reading the diary of a disciple of Anandamoyi Ma, a woman named Swami Atmananda. She had 50 years with Anandamoyi Ma. She was a very deep and beautiful disciple, and the book includes statements by Ma. And this one is the one that just really made me stop and think. Ma is saying, if you go to the marketplace and you see some beautiful object that you desire to have, but choose not to buy it and leave it in the marketplace. Ma said, if a clairvoyant person were to walk into that marketplace, when they saw that object, they would feel your desires still in that object. Isn't that a terrifying prospect? Because what we're talking about is the conservation and the focus of energy. Jyotish talked about self-realization and energization being the fundamental reality of this path of moving into Dwapara Yuga. We're moving out of form, we're moving into energy. So we, as the harbingers of that age, and we, as people living in community, are in that transition between form and energy. Now, Master himself, when he spoke of St. Francis as being his patron saint, he said that St. Francis was devoted to Lady Poverty. Master said, I am devoted to Lady Simplicity. So in a sense, in an age where form was so dominant, which was Kali Yuga, you had to really be absolutely determined in rejecting all manifestations, all form, because form was so much the definition of everyday life that you had to reject it completely. Now we're at a time where energy is becoming the definition, but still we have this balancing act that we have to follow between form and energy. Recently, a couple of years ago actually, we had to move from the apartment that we had lived in our community for 18 years into a place that was about 100 yards away. But it doesn't really matter if it's 100 yards or 1,000 miles. Everything has to be taken out of one place and carried over to the other place. And just as perfect timing would have it, David, my husband, hurt his back just in time for the move. So he did the entire move from one of these comfortable lounge chairs that these ladies are all sitting in now, and I and Gary and Rick and various other great souls in our community moved every item that we own. Of course, if you pick it up and hold it in your hands and have to carry it somewhere, all of a sudden a question arises in your mind. You know, does this go in the dumpster or does it go into the new place that I'm living? And I'm no expert on any of the feng shui or vastu or any of those things that people know in great detail. But one principle was shared with me, which is the only principle I found that I need. Any physical object in your life, you hold it in your hand, and you ask yourself 3 questions. First of all, does this take energy away from me on any level? You know, you pick up a little shachka, that's the Yiddish word, a little thing, chachka, thing that, you know, some object that somebody lovingly gave you, but you've never liked it. And you hold it in your hand, and immediately you have the conflict between your friendship and your actual taste. And, you know, it's been sitting on the shelf all this time. It goes, and this is the instruction, it goes into an opaque plastic bag, so you can't even see it. It goes into a black one. You just get it out of your life. If you hold it in your hand and it's neutral, but in some way it's practical, maybe it's your kitchen knife, and it's a neutral item, it's not beautiful, but you actually use it. You touch it every day and it does something for your life. You may keep it. Okay. And then, of course, anything that you pick up that actually gives you energy. I often ask myself, you know, what is my single most valuable possession? I've had the same Kriya Mala since 1972. And I always think that if the house burned down, I would take my Kriya Mala. You know, even if my Kriyas are going badly. I was remembering recently, this is totally off the subject, this incident that didn't make it into the book I wrote about Swami, but maybe it'll make it into volume 2. At that time, this was very early on, we lived in the little trailers over where Ayodhya is now, and I had this little tiny travel trailer. It was all I needed. And it was somewhat cold in there, and I had one of those narrow-down sleeping bags. And in the wintertime, we'd meditate just by getting into your sleeping bag and then carefully arranging yourself on one of those kneeling benches. Then you'd meditate inside of it. It was very handy. It worked just fine. And then you unzip it and lay it over your bed. We didn't have a lot of money. So often I would just take that sleeping bag and I'd hang it on a clothesline, which was about, 20 feet from the door of my trailer. Well, apparently one day I must have dropped my mala into that bag. I didn't realize that. So I hung the sleeping bag out, and I didn't know that the mala was on the ground. Swamiji rarely came to visit my trailer, but on this particular day he did. He walks around the corner, he calls out, Asha, and then he sees the mala and he picks it up. I open the door and he holds it out and he says, "Bad meditation?" But there are things in our life, and we know that this is a material object, but somehow this material object has been imbued with something that gives me energy. You see, every time I hold that mala, my whole spiritual life is in that mala, right? Now, simple living is not necessarily as we first thought it was when we first moved here. People just tried to live without shoes in the winter, without heat, sometimes without food, without running water. Sometimes we had to, but there was a bottom line. But then people would push it. Let's be St. Francis. And invariably they got pneumonia, almost always. It just was not, as a rule, supported by Divine Mother. And Swamiji himself never followed a policy like that. In fact, in 1970, must have been 76, 77, 78, after he finished the path and went to India. And he wrote, everything was by these letters, remember letters? He wrote letters from India, and he was in Kashmir, and he was visiting Suffering Moses, the great artisan there. He saw that carved furniture. He said, "This is a dying art." Seva was with him then, and he bought all this furniture, the furniture that's in Crystal Hermitage now. Now, of course, he bought that furniture, which fits beautifully in Crystal Hermitage, for this leaky little dome that he had at the time. There wasn't a single building at Ananda that had the slightest relationship to that furniture. I don't think I could have even got one of the chairs inside the door of my trailer, what to speak of a dining room table for 12. And he just said, it's a dying art, we should buy it. And so he did. He brought it all home. Fortunately, they had the Ananda house, and they stored it there for a while. It sort of gradually made its way until Crystal Hermitage manifested, and then it's been there perfect ever since. Now Kashmir is virtually destroyed, and so this was really something. But he said quite simply, it's necessary because if we were just living isolated, he said it wouldn't matter, but because we are representing Master's teachings to the world, we need a certain refinement in the way that we live so that people will recognize the refinement of our ideas. He says if our physical world is too unrefined, they will not be able to imagine that our ideas are as refined as they are. But so that's the point at which you touch it, and it gives you energy. Because it gives us energy for what we're really trying to do, which is ourselves to be in tune, and then through our attunement to be a radiating example to the world. Now, I think for every person, simple really varies. I run, as Hriman mentions, the hospitality of our homes. We simply call our house, we call it Chela Bhavan, the house of the disciples, but what we call it informally is Hotel Praver, because that's really what it is. And so when I moved, it's like either David and I are standing up eating the food right out of the cartons, as Hriman said, or else we're serving elegant dinners for 50 people. So there's nothing in between. So I have all this stuff in the house, which is part of the inn, the hotel, and the fine dining facility, And then in the midst of that, we have our own little world, But we must, at all times, as Master said, be very, very careful that our energy is in charge of matter and that matter is not in charge of our energy. That's what it is to live plain. That's what it is to live simple. Communities, of course, foster this. People come to our community, which is an apartment complex, and the rents are not cheap. Rents are not cheap anywhere in our area. When Paula years ago bought the church that she bought in Portland, we joked that the entire cost of the church in Portland was earnest money where we live. I mean, the money you put down to show that you're serious. They could buy a whole church for what we just had to put down to show that we were real customers. I mean, the economy of Silicon Valley is totally insane, but that's the second question. And the apartments are perfectly adequate, but they're not going to get into Architecture Digest. Not likely, So people come and they're a little dismayed sometimes. But I say, look, you live in an apartment someplace else. Your apartment is your fort against a hostile world. You don't go into the hall. You don't open your door. You can get mugged between your car and your apartment door. And the people around you are often quite disharmonious to your values. I said, you live here, and it's true that your apartment is just your apartment, but your apartment is really a room in this gigantic family home. And when you open your door, you're stepping into your home, not out of it. And you see, that consciousness does several things for us. For one thing, we don't need as much personally, because we're not trying to compensate for the lack of anything else. And secondly, well, why would I own, a big machine when we can all own one machine together? If every time we have too many people in our house, I go over to Dunbar and Maryland's and I get their bowls. That's all. Why would I keep that many bowls in our house? Would they just bring their bowls over? Or you go to the community room and you get what you need. You don't have to own it all yourself. You can literally, physically live cheaper and simpler. But above all, you can live simpler within your heart. Because what we are seeking through form, we receive through consciousness and energy. That's what Master was talking about. That's the simplicity. The simplicity is that consciousness rules. And consciousness, ultimately, you see, is singular. Form is multiple and endlessly multiplying. It just goes on and on and on. Consciousness, the more you get into it, the simpler it becomes. The plain living, plain simple living that Master's talking about, high is based on high thinking. On behind everything, what we see is that presence of spirit. And since that presence of spirit is everywhere, we don't need to collect a lot of stuff to have it. And above all, we don't need to collect a lot internally. It just becomes that inner relationship between ourselves and God. Bless you.
better. I'd like to talk about bringing harmony to the earth, which is the natural extension of what we're talking about, that this community's movement is not about creating a utopian place, and Ananda is not a place. It's a movement, it's a state of mind, but to bring that to this earth and all the residents, both two-legged, four-legged, and the ones that live on their roots and trees, is a part of what Master gave us. He comes from, as Jyotish said, pure spirit. And to make the course correction that we need now is to bring harmony. But Swami Kriyananda has, from the very beginning of this community and the community's movement, understood and kept central to our thinking that we are here not for the earth, not for a beautiful life, not for nice clothes or life in the country. We're here for the realization of the self. And the blending of East and West that Paramahansa Yogananda introduced is not essentially the blending of customs and cultures and language. That is an extension of a central unity. We are, in fact, all part of all that is. We are one spirit. We are one in that consciousness of God. And all of our community efforts, all of these external things, why job, home, church in one place? To realize that job, home, and church is the place of the Spirit, that we are Spirit. And so it becomes our duty to radiate light and expanding light to the world so that the world can see that we are not separate, we are one. That is the consciousness of world brotherhood. And it comes from the realization of the self. The environmental movement, the peace movement, all these movements. And remember, if you will, 1969, 1968. Well, some of you can't remember that. Sorry. My tribe doesn't remember that. The reality is that 68 and 69 was a very tumultuous time. There was tremendous friction. Even our peace rallies often broke into riots. We were not well behaved. We didn't know that there is no peace without the realization of the self within. There is no harmony without the realization of the self. And Master and Swamiji, as his disciple, understood that harmony comes from listening to the melody. The melody is God's will, God's voice. Our job is to harmonize with the song of God. Swami Kriyananda has been asked before if the community's movement, if Ananda is going to the extent and in the direction that he envisioned. And I've heard him say, I didn't envision it. His understanding was to harmonize his efforts and our efforts with the Guru, with Master's vision, and then to let the chips fall where they may. There's always been that sense in Swami's consciousness about this community that we will do the best we can in harmony, listening to Divine Mother's plan and watching. Remember that when Paramahansa Yogananda, this great master that Jyotish was talking about with this world mission coming over and over, when he lived in this world, there was World War I, World War II, there was Stalin and Hitler and unspeakable horror. While Paramahansa Yogananda and Rajarsi Janakananda sat on the beach in Encinitas and meditated. Were they doing their best? Yes. Because by tuning in to the consciousness of God in this breeze, under these trees, in the cities in which we live, we find that we are a channel for harmony. When we don't have harmony on this planet, we have disease and war. I'd like to read a little quote from Paramahansa Yogananda. Unity is the way that leads to the infinite. By discord and diversity, the world is thrown into the boiling pot of sorrow, wars, and death. Uniting souls with truth by ideal living is the way to happiness, peace, and immortality. Swami Kriyananda has never veered or forgotten that that's why we're here and this is what we're doing. And every undertaking that we have made has been an effort to bring harmony. But in order to have harmony, as all singers know, you have to listen to the melody, listen to the bass line. If you don't listen, you'll get off. You'll be more than a half note off. You'll be quite a few notes off. You'll be dissonant. You'll be out of tune. And it won't work. It won't sound right. It won't feel right. So in everything that we do, we're trying to bring harmony. And the question that Swamiji has condensed from the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda is one that we ask about everything we do. What is trying to happen? We have great plans. We had great plans for this community. We used to think that spread like wildfire thing was just like 1970. By 75, we'll be all over the world. Not so fast. Why? Because the world isn't really quite ready. As Paramahansa Yogananda said to Swami Kriyananda, young Swami Kriyananda, the world has not suffered enough to be ready for these teachings in some places and some times. It is very hard to watch the world run headlong into war and famine and disease and greed, to besmirch this planet with chemicals, to wipe out beautiful statues of the Buddha in Afghanistan in the name of religion. All of this foolishness. It's very hard to watch that and say, I surrender into the hands of the Divine Mother. But we must do that. Otherwise, we won't have the harmony. We listen, and you watch, and bit by bit, Swami Kriyananda's understanding of Yogananda has guided us forward. I think we're more popular now than we used to be. I don't know. I'm not sure. Larry Ryder says that we're kind of, for a while we were sort of distasted by the capitalists. We were called communists early in the communal movement. They called us communists because we shared. Communists are not the only ones who shares, and communists actually don't share that much, but we won't get into that. The point is that in order to bring harmony, we have to listen to the Divine Mother. How do we listen? We meditate. How do we farm? We listen to the Divine Mother. We watch the plants. How do we work together? What is world brotherhood? We listen, we look. Master wanted to bring together East and West, but the best of East and West. I'm thoroughly ashamed of the fact that there are Pizza Huts in New Delhi, India. I have never owned Pizza Hut stock. I am not a capitalist. I am not a corporate person. But I'm ashamed that the best of East and West is not Pizza Hut in New Delhi. It is the magnificent, graceful spirit of the Indian people and the courage and dignity of the American people come together in this community and in California, where Master called the New Benares. That is the sharing of East and West. And to harmonize is to listen to the other note and to sing your part. Softly, sweetly, kindly. That is what Swami Kriyananda's role in this world has been. That is the community's movement. It's the missing element in the ecology and environmental movement. Earth first and nailing nails into trees so that a chainsaw will hit it has nothing to do with saving the life force in the tree. Swami Kriyananda has taught us that Master saw unity and was a part of all life. He felt himself as life. That is the community's movement. And that leaves it open-ended, so that, as Hriman said, it can spread to other teachings, but at its heart, it is self-realization. It is the knowing in body, mind, and spirit that you are one with the infinite, that your brother is one with the infinite, your sister is one with the infinite, these trees are one with the infinite, this grass, this pollen, even though it makes you sneeze, these frogs, this wind, this planet, it is alive, it is a gift from the divine. And so we harmonize with it, we respect it, we treat it lovingly. And the world may change or disappear, but truth can never die. It is also temporary. It's also part of Maya. This wonderful body that you've got that's so young, so good looking, is going fast. This planet is going fast. This world is going fast. Spirit is not going fast. Where motion ceases, God begins. In that calmness, in that peace, we have a gift to share with our brothers and sisters. That is the gift that Ananda has for the environmental movement, for the peace movement, for the cooperative movement, for everything, is the realization that we are a part of all that is. We have always been a part of all that is. We will always be a part of all that is. And this whole creation is just to wake us up to the unity that is in the hearts and minds of every being and every aspect of it. And so we study nature. We study the movement of consciousness. And by understanding it through nature, through this planet, through the movements in the oceans and the trees and the forests and the nations and history and the movement of history, we see patterns that move us always towards reverence, calmness, power, light, joy, love, peace. They move us towards God. That's the only reason we're here. Swami never has forgotten that. He emphasized it when we couldn't manifest very much of any of those qualities. He emphasizes it now, and we must emphasize it because it is the reality of Paramahansa Yogananda's teachings. Beholding the one in all. We are one. This community is to bring harmony, and it shines out, it radiates. I'm going to tell you a real quick story that happened yesterday. We went to the river with the Living with Spirit group. The river is the usual mix, a little beer, little cigarettes, a little loud music, some moms with their kids, a hot day, let's get in the river, let's swim. Wonderful. We got in the river. Good. We swam. We went to the waterfalls. We came down the waterfalls. Everybody got bruises. You can tell who's in this group by little bruises on the sides of their hips. It's like a mark of rite of passage. Anyway, at 5 o'clock, Rose said, let's energize. I said, yes, let's energize. So we started to energize. The river started getting quiet. The people going by the river started looking, and they started looking and figure, why is that lady the general? She was doing the energization, and we were all doing energization, 25 of us doing energization together. In, out, breathing. Then she said, let's meditate. So we all sat down to meditate. Got quieter. People swimming down the river stopped yelling and partying as they were going down the river. They started smiling silently and looking at this group. Because the harmony from our hearts, which is a blessing from the Guru, was radiating out. When we ended the meditation, there was no one on the opposite bank. The very quiet, peaceful river in the foothills of the Himalayas. Sage rose and the rishis sitting in deep meditation. Harmony. It radiates out, radiated out to the entire world. Om Tat Sat.
Pretty good. Oh my. Our guru said thoughts are not individually but universally rooted, meaning that there are currents of thought going through this universe that we do not create, but we can only tune into or perceive. And a little less than 200 years ago, not very long ago, some very great men who were the founding fathers of America got together and they said, at whatever cost, we are going to create a nation based on the self-evident truth that all men are created equal. Little less than 200 years, July 4th, 1776. And then some 60 years went by, and there was a great war in this country, the Civil War, to reestablish, to end the one part of the American culture that was out of sync with that concept, that there were still slaves in this country. And Abraham Lincoln, that great soul, Master said he was a great yogi in another lifetime who fought for religious freedom. And he wrote that immortal Gettysburg Address. 77 years ago, a new nation burst forth upon this country. And to say again that all men are created equal. And then Master Yoganandaji came to this world, born at the end of the 19th century. Just the beautiful markers throughout time, whereas Jyotish was saying, constantly realigning the consciousness of humanity. And he came to the West in 1920, one lone soul. In his early 20s he came on the city of Sparta, the great warrior, the warrior divine who was our guru. And he came and he landed on these shores, just as he landed on the shores of England and as William the Conqueror. And many of you know the story when he was beginning the invasion from Normandy. When he got off of the boat, it was this momentous moment, and he fell out of the boat, and he fell face down in the sand. And all the troops that gathered saw this as an ill omen. But Master, the warrior divine, grabbed the sand in his hand and held it over his hand. And he said, so great is my desire to conquer this land that I grasp it in both hands. Then he came to our shores, not as a conqueror of nations, but as a conqueror of souls. And he said, world brotherhood colonies will be the social pattern of the new age, and they will sweep the world like wildfire. Some years ago, when we were in our community in Assisi, we were dedicating the new temple there. Beautiful new temple of light, Il Tempio della Luce. And one of the people who spoke at that inaugural event was a Roman Catholic priest who has subsequently passed away. His name is Don Aldo, a great soul. He was the head, for those of you who have ever heard of the story of the Assisi Underground, who helped smuggle the Jews out of Italy, hid them in their convents and monasteries, disguised them as Catholics, gave them new names, and smuggled them out of the country. Don Aldo was the head of the Assisi Underground. And he was a good friend of ours in our community there in Assisi. He said some years ago he had a vision. And in that vision, he looked up at the hills above Assisi where he lived, and he saw the hills filled with sparkling lights. And he knew that those lights represented a new social pattern, the dawn of a new kind of religion and spiritual community that would illumine the world. Don Aldo has passed away. Abraham Lincoln has passed away. Our founding forefathers has passed away. Our guru has left the body, but their thoughts are rooted in the ether. And as Yogananda said in his historic speech about World Brotherhood Colonies in Beverly Hills, he said, my words are registered in the ether, and they shall move the West. We are part of that great wave in the West that is moving forward this movement. And Master said that these movements would spread everywhere. He said, I see temples to all religions dotting these communities. Kriyanandaji has said, I see communities, not just Ananda. We talk about the Ananda World Brotherhood movements. Ananda is just one manifestation of it. Swamiji said, I can see World Brotherhood colonies based on science, on education, on the arts, on music, on sustainable living, on medicine. All, it's just beginning. And we are like the stem cell, undifferentiated at this point. We have a little bit of all these things. But we said to Ananta and Maria as they began this Living with Spirit program, we kind of tricked you. We told you your job was to raise vegetables. Your job is to raise the new generation of leaders of the World Brotherhood Community Movement, and they are doing a splendid job. But in 1945, Yogananda was at his retreat in Encinitas, putting the final touches on his autobiography. What was going on in the world? Hriman was talking about the bomb. Well, the bomb was dropped. It was dropped on Hiroshima. It was dropped on Nagasaki. And in that moment, that great, huge explosion, Master said, the world as we knew it ended at that time. And the dawn of the new age began, the dawn of the, as he put it, the enigmatic atomic age. What will it look like? And how will these communities shape it? The age prior to the end of World War II was defined by divisiveness. Divisiveness of nationalism, of religious hatred, of families that were self-focused, looking in, as Master said, us four and no more. It was defined by divisiveness of man from nature. And most significantly of all, it was defined by a divisiveness of man from his creator. And our communities have come to bring unity, to redefine the future, that nations can live in brotherhood. Master said that the concept of world brotherhood is best created by example, not precept. We have to model it. We have to show, as we do in our communities, that people of all races, all religions, all national backgrounds, it's simply not an issue. Even in Assisi, even if you speak mutually unintelligible languages, it's not an issue. We all work together. And so to demonstrate this, that the separation between man is that time is over. The time of religious differences, even though there's we still see it in our lifetime, it's a burning fire that the consciousness, the universal thought form of our age will no longer feed, no longer provide fuel that burns in that fire of religious hatred. That flame is going out. Not out yet, but it is going out because the consciousness of the planet is no longer feeding that fire. The consciousness of a broader family. It's living in a community. I cannot tell you the expansiveness of human interaction that it provides. Everyone, every little child is your child. Every person your brother and sister. In that beautiful poem by Walt Whitman, where he said, and I know that every man and woman is my brother and sister, and the hand of God is my own. Just to experience that. And as Ananta was talking, to work with sensitivity with the natural world around you. You go to the Crystal Hermitage Gardens, which we'll have open for all of you this afternoon. You can feel the consciousness and conscious love given to each flower. You know, over the weekend, I should say a few days ago, the Crystal Hermitage Chapel received the award from the Nevada County, that's where we're located, Nevada County, California, from the Nevada County Chamber of Commerce as the best chapel in Nevada County. And this is selected not by some politician on the Chamber of Commerce that we bribed. This is a reader's poll from readers of the local newspapers. They selected this as the best chapel in Nevada County. Why? Is it the most unusual? Is it the largest? Does it have the best sound system? Doesn't even have a sound system. Doesn't have much of a heating system or air conditioning. But what it has is conscious awareness. And people come and they can feel that. So what we are doing, and most important, the unity of all of us with God. Yoganandaji said, the movement of Kriya Yoga in the West has hardly begun. Kriya Yoga is that gift, that divine key of awakening, which enables us to experience our own divinity, the God within us. And so, as we celebrate this wonderful weekend, which is the beginning, joining together of the vision of our forefathers, the vision of our great masters, and I'm sure there is behind the scenes of this curtain of Maya, there was a blend that we don't know about in those two patterns of our forefathers and of America and our masters. A new energy is being born based on the principle that this world is meant to be lived, this world is meant to be a garden of divine consciousness, that we are giving birth to a new pattern of living. And I could say the sky's the limit, but it goes far beyond that. It goes to the farthest reaches of infinity. So open your hearts, open your minds, expand your energy out and feel the breeze of divine consciousness that is blowing through this movement from our masters, from God, and let us go forth and truly spread these communities north, south, east, and west. God bless you all.